Italian boxer Angela Carini, who abandoned her Olympic bout against Algeria's Imane Khelif, has now apologized to her opponent.
All right, you guys, the IOC has come out. That's right. The Olympic Committee has come out with a statement regarding Imane Khelif, tomato. And the official statement basically is, if it looks like a duck and it sounds like a duck, but it wasn't raised as a duck, and duck is definitely not on their passport, then it is not a duck, and you should not mention that it might possibly be a duck. What's up, everybody? Ty Rivera here, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world. Before we get started, I'm just going to ask that you like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to comment just to help me on the algorithm, but you don't know what to comment, just put a knife. Because I know that some of you are still going to come for my neck, because there are people that think I owe an apology, and I really don't feel like I do. I'll tell you guys why. The IOC is being very clever with their wording, and there has to be a reason for that. They know what we're dealing with here is a person that is probably intersex. GLAAD also gave a statement, which GLAAD allegedly is a huge scam, or looks to be a huge scam. I'm going to do a full video on that. So GLAAD carries no credibility as far as I go. But GLAAD came out and said Imane does not identify as intersex. Now, why would GLAAD go out of its way to say that she doesn't identify as intersex and just doesn't say she's not intersex? Because a person can be intersex, and their family just didn't want to acknowledge that, because they do come from a very conservative culture that would not put up with anything that's going to be too different, and just raised her as female. Do I believe she was raised as female? Do I think that she's always identified this way? And I use the word identify loosely, because I don't feel like intersex people should be punished for how they were born. I am 100% being sincere about that and honest about that. I make off-color jokes. I would do that about anybody. Some of the trouble I've gotten in on social media because I'm so loose with the way that I joke, you guys wouldn't understand. So I would not disrespect this fighter, Imane Khelif, especially face-to-face, because she would definitely whoop my ass. Angela Carini would whoop my ass, which Angela Carini, no disrespect to her. I did, however, secure some footage of the IOC talking to Angela Carini in order to get her to make that apology. All right. So then after that, they went ahead and let her know that if she wasn't careful, they were going to lock her in a room with Imane Khelif and just let her do what she wants. And if she thought that one punch was hard, imagine 5 minutes in heaven. But I do seriously think that when it comes to Angela Carini, I think they did take her to a side and say, look, you should not be helping this spread at all, which I don't think that she did really help it spread. She just said that she had never been hit that hard before, which could be, in fact, her experience. And when she was asked about that, she said that she's not in charge of those decisions. And if they said that she could fight, then she could fight. So I don't really think that she owed a particular apology outside of maybe the fact that she didn't shake hands after the match. But if she felt like she had been cheated, until they prove otherwise, I don't think she owes an apology for that either. And I saw people saying that it was white woman tears and that kind of thing. I think that's also uncalled for. I think we are dealing with a person that's either intersex or DSD, which DSD stands for differences in sexual development. It can involve genes, hormones, and reproductive organs, but it has nothing to do with gender identity. It's false to conflate transgender people with people who were born with DSD, said GLAAD, the world's largest lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer media advocacy organization. Some people with DSDs are raised as female, but may have sex chromosomes other than XX, or elevated testosterone level according to the NIH, or Swyer syndrome. People with Swyer syndrome, according to the National Library of Medicine, have one X chromosome and one Y chromosome in each cell, typically found in boys and men, but they have female reproductive structure. Again, it's not known whether either of these boxers has these genetic variations. They have both been competing as women from the start. But like I said, the statement to me doesn't really shake out the way that the IOC is putting it. They were like, if she's always identified as a woman, was raised as a woman, and her passport says she's a woman, then who's disputing that? Or when has there ever been a different definition of what a woman is? And I feel like both the IOC and the IBA, which was the governing body up until this year, are both being a little bit shady. And I get it. Like I said, I get it if these two fighters, Imane Khelif and Lin Yu Ting, have identified as female for their entire lives, been raised as females. I do get that. But I think that we all have pretty much agreed all along that XX chromosome is what we're looking for when it comes to women competing, because that does decide so much. So while I respect that socially you've been raised a particular way and there's been no deviation and you don't feel anything other than that, I think we do have to take that into account if it's going to lead or has led to basically developing as a male or developing a male body, even if you have sex organs that may not jive with that. And I know that that probably sounds confusing to a lot of people. To me, it really doesn't, because if you're also talking about elevated levels of testosterone, that's where the XX women are getting the short end of the stick, because it's really not a fair fight at that point, which they said in their statement that Imane Khelif's strength has never been pointed out as being extraordinary. But I mentioned there was also the Mexican female boxer that also said that it was the hardest hit she ever had. And I think what is happening here is when they have these women that are either DSD, which is one of the ways that you could put that same idea of intersex, then I think that that's something that has to be factored in, and it does change things in the realm of competition. Again, will I respect this person as a woman? For sure. That's what she's always identified as. That's what she's always considered herself. That's what she feels she is. Even if her chromosomes say something different, I still would respect that person to person or on a human level. But what we're talking about is competition. And when it comes to competition, does that give her an edge over the XX women? And should that be taken into account moving forward? Also, even though the IBA is being shady about the way they conducted their testing and hasn't come forth with their exact results, I don't understand why the Olympics can't be a little more forthcoming, because the Olympics says due to the banishment of the IBA, the IOC used rules from 2016 in determining boxers' gender eligibility. It leaves regulations up to each sport's international governing body because they know their sport and their discipline the best, IOC spokesman Mark Adams told reporters. I hope we all agree that we're not calling for people to go back to the days of sex testing, which was a terrible thing to do. This involves real people, and we're talking about real people's lives here. The history of sex testing at the Olympics is decades long, and practices such as invasive physical examination have been exposed as abusive. The IOC in recent years updated its policy to be more inclusive and doesn't require athletes to undergo medically unnecessary procedures or treatment, NBC News reported. Many of the rules set by governing bodies for the participation in women's competitions include testing of athletes' testosterone levels, but it's not a perfect test, Adams said as he addressed the boxing controversy. While scientists and IOC agree that testosterone is an important factor shaping performance in elite athletes in certain sports, events, and disciplines, it doesn't necessarily predict the performance of an individual athlete. I think if you have elevated levels in boxing, that's pretty much going to help you. Many women can have testosterone, which will be called male levels, and still be women and still compete as women. This idea that you do one test for testosterone and that sorts everything out, not the case, I'm afraid, Adams said. Can you not just check their chromosomes? The IOC spokesman told reporters that there has been a lot of misinformation around on social media particularly, which is damaging. And I think that they're really exaggerating providing, and that's another thing that gives me very little faith in what it is they're saying when they say, should we go back to sex testing, which would be an invasive physical exam, probably to make sure that they actually have a vagina. But I think you can get chromosomes from a simple blood test, can you not? Chromosome analysis is usually done on a blood sample. Sometimes amniotic fluid or tissue like skin is tested. A lab will grow the cells in special chemicals. Doesn't sound like it's that difficult. Doesn't sound like it's that invasive. You can also check testosterone from a blood test. That's what I did. I used to get my blood tested every 3 and 6 weeks. So what's the problem? And if we're not going to do something that simple, when there is a controversy, now had there not already been the IBA controversy with these two female boxers, then I could see us asking for this being out of line. But since there has been a controversy and it is in dispute and people do have this question, why can't we know? If we're supposed to be the consumers and we have a problem, I don't think there should be anything wrong with asking, can you not just provide, not a statement from GLAAD. GLAAD is not a blood test. A blood test would be much easier. And I think painting it as either being anti somebody, or I saw at one point that Imane Khelif's mother had made a statement that her daughter had to deal with a lot of racism and discrimination. And it's like, racism? I didn't notice anybody mention her race in a racist or non-racist way. Altogether, the debate has been about whether or not she was intersex, which in the video that I made before, not only did I mention that, technically I cut out a longer version of it where I said what they probably did with these women is they were born intersex, and so their testosterone levels were probably higher, and they probably did what they did for a person like me because I had lower testosterone, so they needed to get me back into the regular range where I need to be, and they would do something like that with them on the female side. And then a commenter in my comments of my last video also mentioned that they were intersex, born intersex, and that they were competing in powerlifting for a while, but in order for them to meet the requirements as far as where their testosterone needed to be, they needed to not only be on female hormones, but they also needed to take birth control at the same time. And they didn't feel like that was worth it to compete, so they chose just not to compete because it wouldn't be fair to the other women. So, providing that we take that person at their word, I think that might shed a little bit of light on what it was I was saying, and I honestly don't feel like I owe anybody an apology until something else comes out that's different, or the Olympics is actually more transparent in what it is they're doing, because the Olympics still has yet to prove that I was actually wrong, or that I was speaking out of turn, or I didn't know what I was talking about. Given the information that we have, which that is not something that's in dispute as far as that was the reason that she was disqualified. That was the official reason they gave. What to know? 2 female boxers who were disqualified from the 2023 World Championship after being judged to have failed gender eligibility tests were cleared to fight at the Olympic Games in Paris, and it sparked outrage from conservatives and anti-LGBT plus commentators. International Boxing Association Russian President Umar Kremlev claimed that the DNA test results showed the 2 athletes have XY chromosomes, but the results were never published. IOC said it stands by the athletes and their eligibility to compete. So, like I said, I feel like they're both being a little cagey with the information, and given that information that we were provided, I made an educated guess as to what was going on and what made it into the controversy that it turned into. So once they offer some transparency, if I'm proven wrong, I will apologize, but as it stands, no, because my statement still stands. Not only does a person that has XY chromosomes and elevated testosterone have a competitive edge when it comes to the actual sport, it's also still a possible physical danger to the XX chromosome female. And I don't care what you say in the comments about, you need to apologize because this woman blah 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 blah. Child, please. If that much effort can't be put forth on their part part, just to let us know that we should actually be apologizing. Find your apology from me right next to their blood test. And as for anybody that thinks I owe an apology for the jokes that I've made, I'm not apologizing for jokes I make. I make jokes about me. I make jokes about other people. If you don't like that, don't follow the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. As always, this has been Ty Rivera, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world.
They bought into his bullshit.
And I have dealt with intersex people, especially online, because there were intersex people at one point that got upset with me because I said that I don't think intersex people should have to be a part of the LGBTQ community. Because when they include the I, LGBTQIA, that stands for intersex. And I don't think intersex people should have to be a part of the community. I said that, and some intersex people thought I was being exclusionary and saying that they shouldn't be a part of the community, which is not what I said. If that's where they feel comfortable, then definitely come on with it. But if you don't feel like you should have to identify as something simply because of the way you were born, I definitely do understand that. If you just choose to live your life one way or the other, that is understandable and respectable.